There is an obsessive compulsion of many liberal state attorneys general against pro-life pregnancy centers.
Yes.
It's pro-life derangement syndrome.
Outstanding is a production of The Washington Stand, your source for news and commentary from a biblical worldview.
You found the Outstanding podcast. I'm your host, Casey Harper. You may have noticed that religious liberty and free speech are under attack in America. Christian counselors are required to use government-approved language on the LGBT issue. Evangelists can't even preach in the local park. Several major cases are now headed to the Supreme Court on this issue and issues like it. But who's going to win? And what will it mean for you? Here to explain is an expert on the topic. Jordan Lorence is a lawyer. He's been working on issues just like these for decades, and we're very glad to have him. He's now the senior counsel at First Liberty, a group representing one of the cases going before the Supreme Court. Jordan, thanks for joining us.
It's great to be here.
Well, I'm glad you're here because, as I said, you really are an expert. Let me ask you the question that I just said, if it's true. Is religious liberty under attack in America?
Well, it is under attack, but I also don't want to make it sound like we're North Korea and be overly alarmist. But I would say in the 4 decades, I know I look a lot younger than I appear to have been doing that. I was a child prodigy.
For our audio-only listeners, Jordan is not a day over 35.
Yes, that's right. We are not like North Korea, so I don't want to overstate that. But also, there are constant threats to our liberty, our religious liberty, like you were outlining there. And the one thing that I have seen is that there are more and more groups dedicated to fighting for religious liberty, like First Liberty Institute, who have very competent attorneys who have joined forces with attorneys in state attorneys general's offices, with big law firms. And so there is a great threat, a significant threat to religious liberty, but also a significant strike force of allied people that are working together and they're very competent to protect religious liberty.
Right. So it can be true that religious liberty is under attack, but that it's winning.
Yes.
Right? Is that maybe accurate?
Right. Yes.
Right. Okay. And from my impression, you've been deep in this issue for so many years, and I've been a journalist. I've covered it here and there.
Right.
My impression is it's whack-a-mole with these cases.
That's right.
They pop up. It's a Christian baker here, a florist there, a counselor gets in trouble here, someone gets fired. I covered a physician's assistant fired over using the wrong pronoun.
Yeah.
And they're all over the country. Are the attacks on religious liberty in America coordinated, or is it just kind of an ethos manifesting itself around the country?
I think it's an ethos manifesting itself rather than there is a concerted effort that there's some sort of LGBT high command handing down decrees or something like that. But I once heard the late Francis Schaeffer, the Christian apologetics expert, say, you don't need to put people in a smoke-filled room to come to the same conclusions if they all think the same way, and I would say the same wrong way. And I think that that's what's happening with this. So that's why you see these kind of cases popping up. I mean, like one of them that I think is like bizarre is these school districts, and there's lots of them that have these policies that say we're going to secretly transition kids.
Yes.
And then we're going to instruct our teachers and school officials to lie to parents. So we had to do in one of the cases that Alliance Defending Freedom had, that they represented a Kansas teacher. And so you usually do an affidavit that says, these are my religious beliefs. And her affidavit said, I have a religious conviction that lying is wrong. I mean, it wasn't some exotic thing. I have to wear a head covering.
We should spread the word on that one in
I
DC.
can't eat pork or something like that. It was like, like everybody should be telling the truth. But those kind of things happen, and cases like that astonish me that well-educated school officials will come to that conclusion in school districts across the country that those are the kinds of things that they have to fight.
Well, part of it is they're all pumped through this bottleneck of the same university systems.
Yes.
There's a lot of universities but there's not so many programs that do certain, things
Yes.
and certain best, quote unquote, best
Right.
programs that all the people get funneled through. And then even the lower programs that aren't as good, they just copy the industry standard, which is created by the, quote unquote,
Yes.
best, most liberal. And so I think a lot of the consensus is created at the collegiate level. But let's get into some of these specific examples of these cases. My understanding is, the Supreme Court has been very busy really settling a lot of big issues.
Yes.
But when it comes to religious liberty, which is now kind of balled together with or tangled with free speech in a lot of ways. You could say, is this really a religious issue or a free speech issue? Sometimes it's a blurry line, or both are being infringed on. But in the Supreme Court,
can I just say that sometimes, so like, for example, if somebody has an objection to getting the COVID vaccination, that would not have a free speech component to it.
Right.
But if you're a street evangelist, for a long time, I represented churches in New York City that were not allowed to rent school facilities to hold worship services. They could hold it for a first aid. They could rent it for a first aid course. They couldn't rent it for a church service. So when you're talking about street evangelists or renting facilities, that's when it has a free speech component. But not all of them do. So that's and if you get a free speech argument, you make it as well as a free exercise argument.
And I think the pronoun issue is a big one where it's free speech, because it's compelled speech. You have to use not just you can't say what you believe, but you have to say what I believe.
You have to say Caesar is the Lord. That's exactly right.
Right.
So you can both censor freedom of speech and you can compel speech. And it's all at the behest of the government. And that's why we have the Bill of Rights, is because we want the government to have power if they're arresting drunk drivers and things like that. But because we have sinful humans running the government, they abuse their authority, and that's why we need the First Amendment, lawyers like me and others like the ones we have at First Liberty Institute to go in and sue people.
I think even the non-believers will agree that sinful humans are running the government.
Yes.
Let me ask you.
Yes.
Several big cases coming up. This time next year, we'll have decisions.
Yes.
What are those cases?
Okay. So just to get a kind of the annual schedule of the Supreme Court, they're on their summer break right now, which they basically go from the first Monday in October to the end of June, and they need that. People think like, oh, they get 3 months off. Like, what's going on? Well, they do work during that time, but you can imagine how intense this is. That last year they had all these extremely intense issues on religious liberty as well as other things. And they're not in agreement. They're all in the same building. And by the end of the term, they're just ready to kill each other. Yeah. And they just need a break to get away from it. Some of them even go overseas because they're not recognized as Supreme Court justices. If they went to a U.S.
The way things are gotten now,
Yeah, so they do that, and then they kind of collect themselves and they come back. So there will be, right before the first Monday in October, they'll hear all the cases that have accumulated all this summer. We could see more religious liberty cases taken. But right now, they have 4 that they've granted review, and they'll probably all be argued between October and January. They have not set their schedule. We know what days they're going to have oral arguments, but which cases they're going to hear, we do not know yet.
Okay. And we know some of the cases, though, that they're going to take up, right? I mean, you mentioned the street preacher. In a lot of ways, I think street preachers don't have a good rep in society today. I mean, a lot of people don't smile when they see him on the street. But
they view him as annoying. I mean,
right. And there's different ways to go about it. And there's a big difference between a guy with a megaphone on the sidewalk, which I'm not against. It's a difference from that and like a group of families doing a park outreach with a bouncy house too. There's a scale.
Exactly.
Here. Yes. So what's going on with that case? How can you get in trouble for that?
The first of the 4 cases to talk about is a case that First Liberty is handling called Gabriel Olivier versus City of Brandon, Mississippi. And so I can describe what the case is about. And with many of these cases, there's sort of a big picture culture war thing that people can relate to. And then the legal question is very esoteric and, kind of like hard to understand and all this. Okay, so what happened was Gabriel Olivier is a street preacher. He went to an amphitheater in Brandon, Mississippi, and the way that they regulate things, which in a way that I believe is very strongly is unconstitutional. They create speech zones, and so you have to stand in this like little area to do your preaching. You can't just wander around on the sidewalks, which sidewalks are public forums, which you should be able to do that. So they put their speech zone far away from where the people are. And so he said, well, this is no good. I can't talk to the people. So he went up to where the people were walking into or out of the amphitheater, and he got ticketed by the police. So what he did was he pled no contest, paid the fine, and then went into federal court to challenge the ordinance with this speech zone, this little designated area, as unconstitutional.
Mm-hmm.
And they invoked, the courts, the federal courts, invoked a case the Supreme Court decided called Heck v. Humphreys. And this is Heck v. Humphrey. And this is where I have to pray for the Holy Spirit to give me the gift of interpretation of tongues. So in this case that they decided back in 1994, this Heck v. Humphrey, a guy who had been convicted of a crime and was serving time in jail, then sued for damages for unjust imprisonment.
Right.
So the courts viewed that as like a sideways attack on his criminal conviction, which if you're going to contest that your criminal conviction wasn't right, you do it through, maybe you've heard the term habeas corpus or just a criminal appeal, but you don't come at it in a sideways fashion with a federal civil rights action, because you're basically saying I shouldn't have been convicted. Okay, that's what they, that I guess that makes some sense. But what the courts here applied it is that the street evangelist, Mr. Olivier, said, I want an injunction, not damages. I want an injunction going forward that I can't be arrested for walking out of this zone and preaching. And the court said, no, you can't.
Because you played no contest?
Yeah. And this is like challenging, and I think this is not logical. You're basically doing a sideways attack on your no contest. Basically you said, I'm not going to fight the fact, I'll pay the fine. And that you're saying I shouldn't have had to pay the fine, which to me is not really right. He's just basically saying, the police, you can't arrest me for violating this thing in the future. Now, the thing that I would point out as one who's done this a long time is that there's a lot of these kind of procedural booby traps in the law that somebody will bring a case and the government doesn't win in the sense that where it says this was okay what the government did. In fact, many times that what the government does is wrong, but they escape liability, they escape responsibility by invoking these kind of procedural traps. And this is one that they've done here. Now, this is the other thing about Supreme Court cases, which you may find interesting. The Supreme Court probably gets about 6,000 cases a year. Last year, I think they had about 60. But it's not like a lottery. A lot of the cases that get appealed are really bad. But of the 60 that they take, or whatever number it is, it's been pretty consistent that they reverse about 2/3 to 3/4 of the time. So if you want to amaze your friends as a Supreme Court expert, you can say, that case the Supreme Court just granted review, I predict they're going to reverse.
Because they wouldn't have taken it up otherwise.
And what I would say of the 25 to 30 some percent that they affirm, those usually are less controversial cases. I think I don't have the statistical, I haven't researched this in a statistical way, but my gut feel as a longtime Supreme Court observer is the more controversial when they grant, they're going to reverse. Because they don't like the decisions below. They like to take, when they deal with an important question, like overturning a Supreme Court precedent is a big deal. They take a case where the lower courts got it wrong rather than when the lower courts got it right, although that does happen on occasion. So I think Mr. Olivier is probably looking at a victory. Allison Ho is going to be arguing this case from she's a prominent Dallas attorney with the Gibson Dunn law firm, and she's going to do a great job with this. And I think sometime we're looking at October, November for an oral argument in this case.
Okay, well, I want to ask you about another one that's very interesting. Thanks for enlightening us on that. And I've never noticed that trend, but now that you mention it, I can see a lot of overturnings, and it makes sense. There's a case in Colorado, which has really gone off the deep end. If you've been following Colorado, their recent, spat of laws have been kind of raised eyebrows, to say the least. And one of them is basically, if I'll give you this example, and correct me if I'm wrong, Christian parents have a Christian 16-year-old son. The son has same-sex attraction.
Right.
Doesn't want it. Smart kid who has thought this through, says, I want to receive counseling on this issue from a Christian perspective to help me process these feelings. And the parents agree. They find a Christian counselor who is, of the same mind. That's illegal in Colorado.
That's right.
Right.
There are 20 states and probably 100 local jurisdictions, usually very liberal blue statey kind of blue states and liberal jurisdictions, that have these bans on that kind of counseling.
Mm-hmm.
Now, they call it that they're banning conversion therapy, and they try to define it as almost like it was like, in past decades, longer ago.
It's a pejorative.
Yeah, it's a pejorative. There's like the children were subjected to medieval torture and that sort of thing. But this is, and I would just add to your scenario, many times that these are children who are struggling, that like it's not like they're being forced by their parents to talk to counselors against their will.
Right.
It's where the child, him or herself, is struggling with this. I don't know how to make the sense of this, or I think I'm the opposite sex trapped in the wrong body, the gender identity type of thing. And they're trying to sort this out, especially if they're Christians.
Yeah.
They're saying the Bible says, we're created, God created us in his image, male and female. And I don't know how to rectify this with God's design for marriage, God's, making us male and female. And what the Colorado law does, and so I wrote down some of the notes, is that it bans conversations encouraging minors to change. But what is okay is to say for the counselor to give acceptance, support, and understanding for the identity, exploration, and development, including assistance to the person undergoing gender transition. So it's basically this one-sided viewpoint discriminatory thing. You can counsel all you want and say, hey, you were born that way, and who are we to judge? And
so it's not saying you can't address this topic. If so, you can't address it from a biblical perspective.
That's right.
But you can address it from a affirming perspective only.
And we're talking about talking.
Yeah.
We're not talking about bamboo shoots under the fingernails or electrical shock treatment or something like that. We're talking to somebody who says, I'm just really confused. I need somebody who has professional training to talk this out. And this is a violation of professional ethics in Colorado. Mm-hmm. So we challenged that. The Alliance Defending Freedom challenged that. And on behalf of Kaylee Childs, who's a licensed counselor, Christian counselor. And the fact that this is talking is pretty clear. So the federal appeals court in Denver said, no, it's actually conduct. We're regulating conduct. Because they knew if they said we're regulating speech,
it wouldn't pass muster.
It wouldn't pass muster. So they said that this is conduct. Now, I don't even understand the weird logic of that.
Mm-hmm.
And the Supreme Court also turned down review of a challenge to a similar law in Washington State. But there are several other courts that have struck these down, other federal appeals courts. So when you get a circuit split, so the federal appeals courts are called circuit courts of appeal. And so when you have some circuits saying these laws are okay, banning this talking to help people sort out their feelings on gender identity and sexual orientation, and some saying that they're not okay, and some saying those laws are okay. So the Supreme Court will take a case to resolve the circuit split, to resolve the legal question on whether this is unconstitutional government regulation of speech. And once again, using that 70% rule, the fact that they took an egregiously wrong decision from the federal appeals court called the 10th Circuit in Denver is a very good sign.
It seems that so many of these appellate courts are becoming increasingly activist in their rulings. They're getting overturned all the time. You see all these rulings coming out. I don't know. As someone who's not a lawyer, not in the legal system, it seems every few weeks there's some ruling that you say, wow, that seems very leftist. It almost feels like those judges are trying to counteract the incumbent Republican administration by, being a check in a general sense to a rightward trend in the nation. But I think it's just hurting the credibility of these courts, and I think people see through it.
Yeah, I mean, if I could just, this is just might be an interesting step back, is probably I think it was about 15 years ago, when the Democrats controlled the Senate, that they got rid of the filibuster for lower court appointees. And then when the Republicans, when Mitch McConnell came in, and I forget exactly what year it was, I think it may have been when Trump came in, I can't remember. Or no, I think it was the last 2 years of Obama administration. They got rid of the filibuster for Supreme Court nominees or somewhere. I may be off on my timing. But what has happened is you only need 51 votes now to get through judges. Now, I would say, I know the claim would be that when President Trump, during his first term, that he put all these ideologues in. In my opinion, and I don't think this is just my perspective, he put in very intelligent people who believed the judge's role is to interpret the law according to its original public meaning, either if it was a constitutional provision or when Congress passed it.
Right.
When Biden came in, he picked basically extreme liberal and progressive activists. And so the kind of court cases you're getting are just, some of them I just think are nutty.
Right.
Now, the one thing right now, I think that of all the active federal judges, they're about half Republican and half Democratic. Some of the older ones, I think President Obama was a little less likely to pick crazy activists. Biden, I just think, just threw the barn door to open and just led.
Or whoever was making those decisions for him.
But there's a lot of Trump judges who I think are really acting as a restraining force. And it's very positive. And it's just they're not equal. They're not like there's a bunch of conservative activists and a bunch of liberal activists. I think there's more principled jurists that are restraining people that just feel like being a judge means a license to do whatever you think is right.
Yeah, that is my sense, and I'm kind of encouraged to hear you. In this, it's not encouraging, but I'm encouraged to see that there is an accurate read and a sense that people are seeing through it. That you feel that way, that people see it for what it is.
And the fact that there's a 6-3 majority of Republican appointees, 3 of them by President Trump, the Supreme Court is really acting as a brake on all of this. And that's why we're getting all these emergency appeals from these crazy orders. And that's a whole other issue about how the emergency docket, which used to be, you get, 20 years ago, you get an occasional last minute appeal of a death sentence before a murderer was executed. And now they're getting them all the time to restrain these nutty lower court decisions.
Yeah, those 2016 to 2020 years proved to be much more fateful than we realized for the Supreme Court.
Yes.
Right? It turned, I think, a hinge for the country and the future of the country. There's another case. This is, I guess, the last one we can talk about that's definitely going to be heard by the court. There's another one we could talk about after this. Faith-based pregnancy resource centers. Now, do you want to just read us in and tell us why this one's important? You know which one I'm referring to.
So this has once again, a big culture war scenario that people can understand.
Right.
That's wrapped in a case where it's a very esoteric technical question. But
it does allow the court sometimes I hear your point, but sometimes they rule on the technical thing and they say, oh, by the way, here's some precedent that
Yes.
changes the issue.
Yeah, and they're sending a message, because what I think they are going to send a message with all of this is there is an obsessive compulsion of many liberal state attorneys general against pro-life pregnancy centers.
Yes.
It's pro-life derangement syndrome.
Mm-hmm.
So we've seen a couple of kind of phases of this. The first one was that the AGs, these liberal AGs, would say, all these pregnancy centers, they're deceiving women into thinking that they're going to an abortion clinic and they want an abortion, and then they can't get an abortion, and then it gets to be too late. That they string them along, and then they can't get an abortion or something like that. And just, I mean, there may be an isolated instance of where that's happened here or there, but and you probably know this as well. The pro-life centers are dedicated servants helping women in need who are freaking out with an unwanted pregnancy. Maybe they can't afford to have a baby or whatever, to get them over the hump, because they mainly see that when that happens, 10, 15, 20 years later, the women who have had, and in fact, I know some personally that I can say, the best blessing in my whole life was my kid from the unwanted pregnancy.
Of course.
So that's what they're trying to do. But that's not the view of these liberal AGs. So they would try to bring consumer fraud lawsuits against these pregnancy centers. Now, the latest thing is, okay, they've shifted now from the women are being deceived who go to these clinics to the donors are being deceived. They're being tricked into thinking that they're funding abortion clinics. And so the Attorney General of New Jersey filed a whole bunch of subpoenas basically asking for the donor list of a chain of pregnancy centers in New Jersey. So I guess, I don't know, go to them and say, hey, do you realize you're funding pro-life stuff and not abortions? And I guess they're expecting people to go, no, really? I'm so surprised. Thank you for cluing me in. I was lied to. And that's not happening. So
it's intimidation.
Yeah,
that's
it's
how you
intimidation.
destroy a nonprofit.
Yes.
Is to reveal their
So when somebody gets an investigative subpoena, if you want it, the legal term is to quash it, you have to go into state court and say, they didn't dot all the I's and cross all the T's, and we shouldn't have to respond to this subpoena. The attorneys for the pregnancy centers also said, and by the way, this violates the freedom of speech because it's trying to intimidate us into silence of not advocating our pro-life message, not like a street evangelist, but more like helping women with all this. And the state court judges said, we're not going to deal with the First Amendment, the freedom of speech issue. So they went into federal court, and the federal courts basically said, oh, well, you've already started in state court. You're stuck there, and you can't do it. Now, this is the thing that I would say from my years of experience of doing these things. If you have under the U.S. Constitution's a freedom of speech claim or free exercise claim, you definitely want it litigated in federal court and not in state court. And if there's any state court judges listening, I don't mean to insult you, but you usually don't deal with First Amendment cases. And when I've been in state court trying to deal with First Amendment issues, I have had immense frustration saying, yeah, okay, you've got all the power and you have no idea what you're talking about. And they'll just do crazy rulings. And even when you appeal, you sometimes get judges who don't I would say with some frequency, don't know what they're doing. So to be denied a
because
federal
the cases
court,
are so rare.
Yeah, they're so rare. They're more common in federal court. I also think, again, not to insult any state court judges, the quality of the judges in federal court is higher. So even if they're unfamiliar with a topic, they can grasp what you're talking about. And I just feel like I've been in state court where I said I've thought to myself, I would not say this out loud. I'm always respectful to their position of authority, but man, how did you get out of law school, Mr. Judge? And you are so dense on this topic, that sort of thing. So this is definitely an intimidation tactic to kind of shut down these pro-life pregnancy centers. But again, because the lower courts ruled you're stuck in state court, you can't go into federal court, the Supreme Court took this case. I think the likely outcome is they're going to rule the right way. And so this gets back, to is religious liberty under threat? Yes, it is in New Jersey, but they're not sending people to the gulag or lining up in front of firing squads.
Yeah.
But you can still have a religious, you don't have to be as bad as North Korea to have religious liberty violations. But to get them to get shut down, we need the Supreme Court to say, you cannot be denied a federal forum for adjudicating your First Amendment rights because you trickily subpoenaed the people to force them to start in state court.
Yeah.
That's the little dodge that's going on here.
I will say a speech zone sounds pretty North Korean.
Yes.
It's a language and there's a lot of people who have that mindset.
Well, and always start small. Like, I mean, they don't start with, everybody gets shot who's a Christian. I mean, maybe if they have a revolution or something, but
the French Revolution,
these nibbling away at rights can be, I just give you perspective. When I started doing religious liberty work in 1984, I started with I worked for two groups. One of them was this new group called Homeschool Legal Defense Association. And our main goal was to keep people out of jail for homeschooling.
Right.
Now, that may be like, wow, I can't even imagine. The listeners are thinking, we homeschool our kids and we got a co-op and, all this kind of stuff. And we have a state speech and debate tournament and all this sort of stuff.
Yeah.
All that stuff had to all be done underground because people were going to jail. So we have had progress,
for sure,
but you need to have the diligence of the perseverance is always the cost of liberty.
And that was for truancy?
That's right.
Yeah. It's kind of, they're being, like I said, they're being rescued by the Supreme Court many times for these crazy lower court rulings and this animus in very liberal states. I mean, to go after them. And we're just focusing on the free speech and religious liberty cases, but there's so many more that we could talk about, kids being taken away from parents who won't affirm transgenderism in California.
That's right.
I mean, now on every front, we're under attack here. I want to ask you about one more case.
Sure.
Two Christian schools, high school football championship. They want to pray before the game, which is what we did in public school all growing up. We prayed before the games. And they want to pray before the game, and they're not allowed to. Two Christian schools can't pray before a football game?
That's right.
How can that be?
So, and this case has not been granted review yet, but it's been appealed to the Supreme Court, and it will be considered probably in the next 2 months. Just so you can set the table for all this. One of the greatest wins that First Liberty Institute won was the Coach Kennedy case, not just so that the coach could pray, which was very, very important, but it got rid of what's called the Lemon test. It was from a case from 1971 called Lemon v. Kurtzman, which was this extreme interpretation of the Establishment Clause, some people know as separation of church and state. And so basically, the test, which I could go into more legal detail, was just basically they said to the government, treat religion like a hazardous waste, like asbestos in the ceiling tiles, and you want to go on a search and destroy mission and eradicate it everywhere. And because if the government allows something, it means it's endorsing it. And we can't have government endorsing religion. Oh, no. So you would get these crazy decisions like the Coach Kennedy case, cases that I did, like this one in New York City, Bronx Household of Faith, where they had 100,000 community groups using 1,200 schools, but they would not allow religious groups to rent the public schools on weekends when nobody was there for worship services because they said, oh, somebody might think this is a government-endorsed school religion, and which is just crazy. So that's the kind of mindset. So you got to view this as sort of like First Liberty got rid of the Lemon test. This shouldn't be a problem. This is how that case was first litigated, and then all of a sudden, Coach Kennedy takes away the Lemon test, So what's the athletic conference officials in Florida going to do with all of this? And so they basically still have this mindset, and it's like an uninvited guest that won't leave the party. It's this whole lemon test that there must be something wrong. This looks like government endorsement. So and again, trying to make this as simple as possible, they invoked a Supreme Court case about whether you could have Confederate flags on state license plates. And the Supreme Court said, well, that would be government speech, and it would look like the government isn't, because the license plates are all manufactured by the government, and it would look like the government's endorsing the Confederacy, so that was okay. And I'm not sure the premise of their thing is correct, of their argument, but they made this endorsement argument. So the Florida officials then shifted gears and said, okay, well, we're abandoning our Establishment Clause argument, and we're going to say, when you speak on the intercom at a game during pregame or halftime, it's all government-endorsed speech, and we don't want to endorse religion. Now, we're not invoking separation of church and state. We're just saying this is a position we don't want to invoke. But now they would let other people come and make comments. They would do advertising. Yeah, all this sort of stuff. So it's just a total misuse of this government speech doctrine. I think that there were 20 friend of the court briefs that were filed in support. And that's important because the vast majority of cases appeal to the Supreme Court are so kooky, they don't sometimes even get a response from the person who won below. But when you get friend of the court briefs, you have that signals to the court, this is one of those handful of cases, the 60 or so that we're going to take. This is a candidate for that because it's invoking so much interest. So these friend of the court briefs have a signaling purpose. I think that this case could be one that they grant, but we won't know probably for another 2-3 months whether they take it or not.
So we won't know if they're going to take it up yet. There's other cases. I mean, as we kind of begin to wrap up here, when you look ahead, and you've argued before the Supreme Court,
yes.
You've known the court in its different iterations.
Yes.
How do you view the court now? Is it a bunch of, as many on the left will say, a bunch of radical right-wingers? I don't think so, but I want to hear what you think.
I mean, some of them are a little more bold in their philosophy. Some of them are a little more, we just want to make sure all the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed. But I would say, overall, this court is the best Supreme Court we have had in my professional lifetime. And that President Trump picked excellent people. Now, some people might say, well, why couldn't this person have been picked? That would have been better than this specific one. And what I would just say is you have to look at the political realities. Did they have the votes? If some of the more squishy liberal Republicans would not have gone for somebody that, they have to get people through. But I think that this court has been really great. And I think that they tend to build up to big decisions. And like when we had the Skermetti case last year on the Tennessee law forbidding minors from transitioning to the opposite sex, which, that can't even really be done. But just all the mutilation and all that sort of stuff. They're going to have the girls' athletics cases, whether Title IX. I mean, they took a case that said Title IX requires boys to play on girls' teams.
Yeah.
Now, I grew up in this.
Quite literally the inversion of what the law was written to do.
It is perverse.
Yeah.
And they granted review, and I think we're going to see the blast radius of the crater created by Skermetti increased with these two girls' athletics cases. And I think we're going to see with the fact that they're taking these important religious liberty cases is, very significant. Just getting back to this street preacher case, for example, it may seem kind of esoteric whether you can get whether you can get an injunction once you've pled no contest in state court to a crime. But those are the kinds of things that really open the lane up. It's like you go from 2 lanes to 4 lanes, and you can really move a lot better. It takes down stoplights that you can really increase religious liberty for everybody. So all these cases are very good. And I just thank God that we have these various groups that are out there with their increasing amount of expertise that can represent everyday Americans and be their voice at the Supreme Court, and that we have a president who's put people on the court who are sympathetic to what these arguments are, and don't have a worldview that just finds it alien or dismissive or something like that.
Yeah, well, so many of the storied groups that used to stand for some of these values, maybe like the ACLU, have just totally gone off the rails and are not really, don't hold the respect that they once did or stand up for people's rights, even if they don't agree with them. So we need new groups. We need new balanced justices and judges because of all the radical activist judges. And I think we're getting them. It's an interesting time. Everything is very divided right now, including the judiciary. But thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it. And thank you for listening. This is the Outstanding Podcast. You can please like, subscribe, comment, share with your friends and family, post online, post on your social media. As I always tell you, the algorithm is not our friend because we take on issues that others are afraid to take on, and we talk about it in a way that a lot of people don't talk about it. Because we want to be honest, we take the biblical perspective, and that's why you love us here. So thanks for listening, and thanks so much for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Outstanding is a production of The Washington Stand, your source for news and commentary from a biblical worldview. This podcast is made in the USA by producer Casey Harper, production assistant Rachel Woods, technical producers David Salkeld and Yusef Fletcher, and executive producer Jared Bridges. Help support us by texting the word outstanding to 67742 and read more at washingtonstand.com.